And I guess part of the management approach should be some measures of effectiveness. Are we doing what we thought we would, we intended to do? Or are we not, and we need to change the approach? So I think a management plan should have some gauge of effectiveness.
Well, we could take every one of those addresses, and let's say it's whatever it is, it's 130, whatever the number is. And next year they might be different, but you could set up a program that said, let's do this. We could figure out the acreage of the whole town. Okay, and we could say if you want to spend X dollars a year, you could touch every house in the town once every 5 years, once every 3 years. You could do that. We could put a dollar number on every one of those management units, and say to the residents, based on what the board wanted to spend, we could spray every one of those management units once every X number of years. You could do that too.
But you did say one thing, that you haven't seen the tree that you thought had been lost because it's smoke.
I honestly haven't.
There's just more of a nuisance in there.
I have a question for Bruce. What if there's a resident in the zone that's being sprayed that doesn't want his house sprayed?
You want me to answer that, Bruce?
Yes, I do.
Having discussed the things that Kirsten gave me the list of the things we need to do. We do this every time. This is just to remind me. Once we have the spray areas defined, we notify people in the area. We put it on the website. We also can have the police department do the reverse calling thing. Okay. Now what would have to happen there is we'd have to have that particular lot. The village engineer could do this for us. We'd have that particular lot located with the GPS link. Now, when you're flying a helicopter at the height they fly it, their minimum size to spray is 5 acres. So when they're flying, you turn it on, you turn it off. You see what I mean? It would be very difficult to spray everywhere around one lot. If the picture that Bill was referring to, I don't know what that was, where that was, and what they were spraying, but there's always some edge drift on that a little bit. So I think it'd be very hard to isolate one lot. We could try it.
But is there an opt-out provision?
Well,
what if someone is just keenly against having this spray on their property for allergy, for whatever reason?
Well, I think what we'd have to do is I have to talk to the flying service, but their minimum size is 5 acres. I think they'd probably look at that the same way. They could probably avoid 5 acres. I don't know if they could avoid
2 acres.
An acre or 2 acres. That's something I'd have to ask them. But the mechanism is there to notify people and have them.
He's talking about legally.
Yeah, well, I'm saying, there appears to be an outcry to do some spraying, assuming most of these people are here for that reason. But there may be some people who really are dead against that their property sprayed.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Mike?
Well, number one,
Identify yourself.
on my corn. Don't send me any bad letters or calls. But
could you give us your address, too, please?
no, I live on Blackfire. You want my phone number?
No, just your address.
She needs it for the record.
She needs it for the record,
I'm on
and
Blackthorn
because I want to know where people are
3075.
concerned
I was
about
going to get bombed. Number one, to answer your question, Mr. Haber, I guess we could go back to 05 and see what happened and how that was handled with people who didn't want to be sprayed. Maybe some of those cases came up then. You could go back to 05.
We didn't have any opt-outs.
Well, it says here, the aerial spraying was done in 05, so there may be, nobody opted out.
I don't remember any
Okay.
of that.
There were no objections.
So nobody objected?
No.
Okay. The other thing is...
I don't know if there was even a process, though, but we
Yeah, we did.
We did.
I recall.
We did.
There was.
Well, the notification process has been consistently the same.
I know the notice, but I'm not sure that the notice gave you an opportunity to opt out.
But nobody picked up the
nobody
phone
did.
and said, oh my God, you're spraying and I don't want it.
I understand, I'm just saying.
The other thing is that, to me, this is very similar to the program we have of pulling those weeds, what do you call them, Eileen? Garlic mustard out, and you subsidize the people who do it. You help them do it with some money. This way, it's kind of like the same thing. Instead of us having to do it individually by ourselves and paying for it, the village is paying for it, and we're paying taxes to the village. So I don't really see a big difference between subsidizing for pulling out those weeds or spraying for mosquitoes. It seems like the same kind of logic.
Are you for or against it?
I'm for it. I'm for it. But I don't pull weeds, my wife does. I don't pull weeds.
Lou Glantz, 1516 Indian Trail, Riverwoods. I've been here a while. As a matter of fact, was one who instituted and brought on Clark Spring to start the mosquito abatement program 2 years ago. Just to let you know, and you know, in North Riverwoods Indian Trail area, we have some storm drainage problems, a lot of water lying around, which has really caused a number of trees to become vulnerable. And I happen to have one on my property that's 3.5 feet in diameter, that's been around a long time. It is vulnerable. And an attack like gypsy moss would probably finish it off. It's been trimmed now the upper areas at least 2 times. So I just wanted to make that point. There are some serious problems with oak trees.
Joan Becker, 2750 Edgewood Lane. First I want to say I appreciate the board's reconsidering this. I think evident from the number of people here, it's something we all consider as a very important issue in a Tree City, USA. My concern is that one of the things that Chuck cited as a reason for spraying or not spraying an area has to do with the number of calls that were received. And as many of you will remember, last year Nancy was inundated with calls because people had expected that they were going to get sprayed last year and it didn't happen, and people were calling in like crazy. And finally, the word went out, stop calling. We know everybody is going to get sprayed this year. So people stopped calling. So I do wonder if Chuck's premise is really accurate. If you're taking into account the number of people who call with complaints as being hotspots, I think that's possibly a fallacy. I would say that based on what I understood of the Arborsmith program, you have to look at every year as an individual year. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. I don't know what's going to happen next year. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But I would ask the board to consider spraying the entire village this year because of all the confusion that occurred last year. You may have people who have massive amounts of gypsy moths who are not on that map, and I can't really tell you who's in and who's out by a 1-second reading of that map. But I think given all the confusion that happened last year, it would be a good idea to use this as an unusual year, and if the village is in fact as healthy as it is economically, which we heard so much of during the campaign, then that one-time expenditure would not be a lot if it's going to give us protection. The only other 2 things I want to say are that the reason you would have the village spray rather than having individual homeowners spray, as Arborsmith pointed out, aerial spraying from helicopters is much more effective than the equipment that's available to your individual arborist. I would also point out for those of you who might be left off this list and who think that then they're going to spray by themselves, I did get my proposal from Arborsmith today, should you decide not to spray my property, and it will cost me for 26 oak trees only, just the ones closest to my house, because Arborsmith tells me that these are the ones who are most stressed by my living on the property. This is going to cost me for 26 trees approximately $1,300. So I don't know how many trees everybody has on their house, but this is not an insignificant sum. So that would be my pitch. Thank you.
I'm Howard Patterson from Thorn Meadow, directly west of here, and we went to the Arborsmith to get a quote on it. We have, it's primarily a maple forest there, but we do have some big